And now, marine weather around Alaska. Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook. It is Sunday, April 28th, 2024, and this outlook will be for the early week, Monday and Tuesday. But before then, this Sunday afternoon, here is the state of the sea ice. Notice the openings, these polynyas in the eastern and the areas along the southern side of Norton Sound, as well as along the Yukon-Kuskokwim deltas. We also find the ice, at least coverage, shrinking here up through the central Bering and around Nunavik Island, and we'd expect this trend to continue because we are so far into the spring season with a higher sun angle, and even though we will have a couple of more notable weather systems coming into the southwest here by the end of the week, at least for the short term, we don't anticipate too much movement in the ice, though there may be a northerly flow of air across some of those areas here to start out the week. Looking at the synoptic setting, we have one area of low pressure just southwest of Haida Gwaii that's going to be moving southeastward away from the southeastern Gulf. That'll help things dry out on Monday across the Panhandle. A weak low south of the Alaska Peninsula. This would be very late tonight, early on Monday morning. Weak high pressure over the central Bering, stronger high up in the Arctic Ocean, and then a couple of low pressure systems along the Kamchatka coast and then southwest of the western Aleutians. Monday afternoon, we find that low sliding further southeastward off of Vancouver, weak ridge of high pressure up into the lower Gulf, weak thermal trough, Alaska range back into northwest Canada. We'll see the daytime heating will cause scattered showers of snow or mixed snow, ice pellets, and rain across especially northwest Canada. A few of those could dot the interior. The low south of the Alaska Peninsula, pretty weak. High pressure centered up just west of St. Lawrence Island, and then here comes the main low entering the far, far western Aleutians, approaching the southwest Bering Sea. And then by Tuesday, the lows kind of string out, a little secondary development along the secluded front pushing through the central and eastern Aleutians. We have the other low now advancing east, but that should stay south of the Gulf, at least for the time being. It's going to get more active once this system gets a little farther east. We're also going to have some energy coming up out of the North Pacific toward the western Gulf. So look for a more active pattern developing here across the Aleutians, southwest Alaska, into the Gulf as we get toward the end of the week and for the weekend. So looking at what we got for winds here Monday for the inner channels of the Panhandle, pretty variable. South 10 knots, couple of foot waves tops there, foot or two there in the Lynn Canal. Northwest winds 10 knots, Stevens Passage, variable 5 knots there, Dixon Entrance. For the outer coast, winds 15 to 20 knots, generally out of the northwest, and swells right around 7 feet. As we go into Tuesday, kind of a mixed bag of 10-knot winds for the inner channels, waves a foot or two. Outer coast, somewhat variable winds as you get up toward outside of Yakutat Bay, variable at 5 knots, but otherwise Gustavus is southward off of Sitka and Craig. Look for winds that have some sort of westerly component at 10 knots and swells just 4 or 5 feet. Pretty quiet winds, variable around 10 knots, Prince William Sound, along the Kenai coast, northeast of Kodiak Island. Within the lower portion of Cook Inlet, we're looking at maybe westerly winds 15 knots. Swells or waves there only a couple few feet, and the variable winds continue around 10 knots from lower Cook Inlet to along the Kenai coast into outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance on Tuesday. Variable winds at 10 knots with swells of just 2 or 3 feet. Southeast winds to 10 knots within this broader area of Prince William Sound. South winds 10 to 15 knots mid and upper Cook Inlet. On Monday, southwest winds around 15 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, both sides, including Shelikof Strait. Variable winds around 10 knots through the middle of the Alaska Peninsula. North winds to 15 knots, either side, Cold Bay and False Pass. We're looking at waves of only a couple of feet. And then look at this. Everybody's just kind of a mixed bag of variable winds to 10 knots, 5 to 10 knots, and waves generally just running 1 to 3 feet. Now the Aleutians, for the eastern Aleutians, look for north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots. They'll turn around to the southeast and increase 25 knots, middle Aleutians, Atka to Adak. But you get west of Adak, we have 40 to 45 knot southeasterly gales in advance of a stronger frontal system and a couple areas of low pressure and waves building in excess of 15 feet west of Kiska. And then on Tuesday, look for southeast to south winds 20 to 30 knots, eastern Aleutians into the central Aleutians, and then trying to turn back around more toward the south-southwest, 20 to as high as 30 knots south of Shimia and west of Kiska, where waves could be in the 15 to near 20-foot class. And then along the southwest coast, variable winds to 10 knots within Bristol Bay on Monday. Also variable winds to 10 knots, Pribilof Islands. Generally north winds 10 to 15 knots along the lower Yukon Delta coastline, as well as over at St. Matthew with ice, but there has been some openings developed where waves or swells could just be a couple of feet. And for Tuesday, we expect variable winds to 10 knots within Bristol Bay, north winds 10 knots out of Kuskokwim Bay, east-northeast winds 15 knots St. Paul, but northeasterly to 25 knots at St. Matthew, and northeast to north winds 10 to 15 knots out of Norton Sound and down along the lower Yukon coast. As we go up from St. Lawrence Island through the Bering Strait, strongest winds will be along the west side of the Seward Peninsula there at Wales, maybe to 25 knots out of the north. Winds will turn west-northwesterly into Kotzebue Sound in the lower Chukchi, but then be east to northeast around 20 knots off of Wainwright and Cape Lisburne. And then for the Arctic coast, Utqiagvik to Kaktovik, we're looking at east to northeast winds at 10 knots. And on Tuesday, winds up across the far north will be somewhat variable. There is going to be a front dropping down, bringing in a little shot of colder air. So winds will be westerly at Kaktovik, 15 knots, turning north-northeasterly Prudhoe Bay back toward Wainwright and increasing 20 to 25 knot east-northeast winds here, Wainwright down to off of Point Hope, and then through the Bering Strait, look for generally northerly winds 15 to 20 knots through the Bering Strait on the west side of on the north side of St. Lawrence Island, and for the western Seward Peninsula during the day on Tuesday.